She walked into the auction to save her mother's life, and a stranger paid $1 million for one night with her. When the gavel fell, her fate was sealed, but the man who bought her had no intention of letting her go after just one night. Lila Chen sat at the kitchen table with her knees pulled up to her chest, a fortress against the storm of paper threatening to bury her. The light above buzzed faintly, the kind of sound that gnawed at her frayed nerves, and the stack of medical bills glared up at her like a silent accusation. Words like urgent, final notice, and payment required screamed from the pages, each one a weight pressing harder against her chest until she could barely breathe. The apartment was quiet except for the rhythmic ticking of the cheap wall clock and the cough that came from the bedroom, a fragile, raspy sound that made Lila's stomach twist. Her mother was sleeping, or at least trying to, and every breath she took sounded like it cost her more strength than she had to give. Lila's hand trembled as she picked up the top bill, running her thumb over the number at the bottom. It was more than she made in 3 months at the gallery, and there were 3 more treatments scheduled in the next 6 weeks. She dropped the paper and buried her face in her hands. She had already sold most of what could be sold: her easel, her better brushes, half her wardrobe, even the gold bracelet her mother had given her for graduation. She'd picked up extra shifts, begged for commissions, sold sketches online for next to nothing, but it hadn't been enough. The monster of debt kept growing, eating every penny she earned and still demanding more. Her phone buzzed on the table, the sharp sound making her jump. Carmen's name flashed on the screen, her best friend from college who now lived in a world of champagne brunches and designer handbags. Lila hesitated, then swiped to answer. "You sound awful," Carmen said by way of greeting, her voice softened with genuine worry but underscored by the hum of laughter and clinking glasses in the background. "Have you even eaten today?" "I'm fine," Lila lied, her voice raw from crying. "Just tired." "Lila." Carmen's tone shifted, firm but gentle. "I know things are bad. I've been thinking about something, an option. You probably won't like it, but I need to say it." Lila's chest tightened. "What kind of option?" "There's an event I go to sometimes," Carmen said carefully. "Private, very exclusive. Women get invited, men bid on their time for the evening. It's not sleazy, not like the stuff you're probably picturing. Elegant dinners, galas, charity events. Some women just accompany these men and leave at the end of the night." Lila felt her breath catch. "You mean like an escort service?" "Not exactly, it's more civilized. The money can be life-changing, Lila. I've seen women pay off entire student loans with one night." Her first instinct was to hang up, but the words rooted her in place. Her mother's next treatment was due in 3 days. Without payment, the hospital would cancel it. Lila squeezed her eyes shut, imagining her mother's face when she told her they couldn't afford it. The thought made her feel like she was suffocating. "Just think about it," Carmen said softly. "I can get you in. You wouldn't have to do anything you don't want to do. You can walk away if it feels wrong." Lila ended the call and sat in silence, staring at the papers spread across the table. The apartment seemed too small, too loud with its silence, as if the very air was judging her. She pressed her palms to her eyes until stars danced behind her lids. That night she stood by her mother's bed watching her sleep. The dim light from the hallway pooled across her mother's face, making her look smaller, weaker. She brushed a stray strand of hair from her mother's forehead, her throat aching. "I'll fix this," she whispered, the words catching like a vow in her chest. "I promise." By morning, the decision was made. Lila called Carmen back with shaking hands and asked her to make the arrangements. Whatever this world was, whatever waited for her on the other side of that door, she would face it. Pride could be rebuilt later. Her mother couldn't wait. When she hung up, the apartment felt even quieter than before, as though it knew something irreversible had just been set into motion. Lila stood in the middle of the room, her heart hammering, feeling both terrified and strangely calm. She had made her choice. All that was left was to follow it through, no matter where it led. The car Carmen had arranged rolled to a stop in front of a building so elegant it didn't seem real. Polished marble steps led up to towering glass doors framed by brass, glowing golden under the soft evening lights. For a long moment, Lila sat frozen in the back seat, her fingers clenched around her small clutch as if it were a lifeline. The driver opened her door, and the cool night air brushed against her bare arms, sending a shiver through her that had little to do with the temperature. Inside, the lobby was hushed, almost reverent. Crystal chandeliers hung overhead, casting warm pools of light on white marble floors. It felt like stepping into a different world, a world that wasn't hers. A woman with sleek dark hair and a clipboard greeted her with a professional smile. "Miss Chen?" Lila nodded, her voice caught somewhere in her throat. "This way." The woman, Alessandra, Carmen had said her name was, led her through a corridor into a suite where the air buzzed with quiet energy. Several women were already there, some chatting easily, some sitting with practiced poise as makeup artists and stylists swirled around them like a choreographed dance. "This is the preparation room," Alessandra explained. Her voice was calm, reassuring, as though she had done this 100 times. "Hair, makeup, wardrobe, everything is taken care of. You will be presented when your name is called. Until then, you'll remain here. Are you ready?" Lila's lips felt numb as she whispered, "I think so." An elegant woman with bright red hair and the kind of confidence that came from experience caught Lila's gaze from across the room. "First time?" she asked, her smile knowing but not unkind. "Yes," Lila admitted, her voice small. "Don't worry," the woman said, her tone softer now. "Most of these men are gentlemen. They pay for respect and discretion as much as for companionship. You're safe here." Safe. The word sounded strange, almost ironic, considering what was about to happen. Hours seemed to blur as stylists transformed her piece by piece. Her unruly hair was coaxed into soft waves that framed her face, her makeup flawless but understated. Her lips painted a daring shade that made her look like a version of herself she had never seen before. When they finally zipped her into a midnight blue silk dress that skimmed her curves and fell just above her knees, she hardly recognized the woman staring back at her in the mirror. For a moment, fear almost swallowed her whole. She wasn't sure she could step out there. Wasn't sure she could stand under those lights and be seen, be chosen. Then she thought of her mother's hand in hers, of the way her voice had trembled when she apologized for being a burden. That memory steadied her more than anything Alessandra could have said. The moment came faster than she expected. Alessandra's voice was a soft whisper at her shoulder. "It's time." Her legs felt like they were made of glass as she followed Alessandra down a narrow hallway into a grand ballroom that seemed to shimmer with gold. Every surface gleamed, the polished floors, the crystal chandeliers, even the watchful eyes of the men seated at small tables around the room. They were impeccably dressed, powerful, their attention snapping toward the stage as the auctioneer began speaking. Lila's heart hammered as she watched the first woman step onto the platform. The bidding started instantly, numbers called out with casual confidence. 50,000, 75, 100. The amount soared higher than Lila could comprehend. When the gavel finally came down, the winner smiled with quiet satisfaction, and the woman walked gracefully to join him. One by one, the other women followed, and with each one, Lila felt her nerves coil tighter. By the time her name was called, her palms were slick with sweat. She walked up the steps as though in a dream, the silk of her dress whispering against her legs. The spotlight bathed her in warm light, blinding her to everything but the faint outline of faces in the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer said, his voice smooth and practiced, "please welcome Miss Lila Chen. This is her first time joining us tonight." The words echoed in the air like a secret exposed. Lila forced herself to stand tall, even as her pulse thundered in her ears. 50 you sand, someone called from the left. 75, 200. The numbers climbed quickly, faster than she could keep track, each one feeling like a hammer striking closer to her chest. Then, from the shadowed corner of the room, a voice cut through the din like a blade. 1 million. The room went silent. Lila's breath caught, her eyes scanning the darkness until she saw him. A tall man sat alone, half hidden in the shadows. She couldn't see his face clearly, but his stillness was magnetic, a presence that seemed to fill the space around him. 1 million going once, the announcer said, almost in disbelief. Going twice. Sold. The gavel struck. The sound was final, echoing through Lila like a starting gun. Her knees nearly buckled as Alessandra's hand touched her arm, steadying her. Somewhere deep inside, a voice whispered that her life had just changed forever, that she had crossed a line she could never uncross. And in that charged electric moment, all she could think about was the man in the shadows and what he would demand of her when they were finally alone. The door closed behind her with a soft click, and Lila was suddenly aware of the pounding of her heart, as if the sound alone could shatter the fragile silence of the room. The suite was nothing like she'd imagined. Not the decadent lair of some predatory man, but an elegant space bathed in warm golden light, lined with floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the city like a living painting. The faint hum of traffic far below was the only sound. She turned at the sound of footsteps. He was taller up close, the kind of tall that carried its own gravity. His dark hair was swept neatly back, though a few strands had fallen loose, softening what might otherwise have been a sharply commanding presence. His black suit looked tailored not just to his body but to his soul. Precise, controlled, perfect. "Miss Chen," he said, and his voice was low, even, with the kind of authority that didn't need to raise its volume to be heard. "Mr. she started, realizing she didn't know his name. "Cole," he replied. "Damian Cole." She had heard the name before, whispered in connection to tech empires, investment firms, even political campaigns. A man who built companies, broke competitors, and never gave interviews. And now he was standing in front of her, looking at her as though she were the most interesting thing he'd seen in years. "You're younger than I expected," he said finally, not unkindly. Lila swallowed hard. "I'm 24. His gaze lingered on her, assessing but not cruel. Then he gestured toward a low velvet sofa. "Sit, please." She obeyed, her hands clutched tightly in her lap. He poured 2 glasses of something clear and cold from a crystal decanter, set one in front of her, then sat across from her. Not too close, but close enough that she could see the faint shadow of stubble on his jaw, the small scar near his temple that humanized his otherwise immaculate exterior. "I imagine you have questions," he said, leaning back slightly, but his eyes never left hers. Her throat felt dry. "I just need to know what you expect of me." The corners of his mouth tilted almost imperceptibly, as though she'd said something both brave and naive. "Honesty, to start with. You've never done this before." It wasn't a question. Lila hesitated, her fingers tightening around the glass. "No." "How new?" His tone was calm, but there was a razor's edge beneath it. Lila's face burned. "This is my first time at anything like this. At anything." For the first time, Damian's composure cracked. His brows drew together, and for a long moment he was silent, just staring at her as if recalibrating what he thought he knew. "You mean," he said slowly, "you've never been with a man?" Lila looked away, shame and humiliation clawing up her throat. "I haven't had time for that," she said, her voice breaking. "I've been too busy trying to keep my mother alive." The silence stretched until it became unbearable. She risked a glance at him and found that the sharpness had vanished from his face. Something softer, more dangerous, had taken its place. "You came here tonight," he said quietly, "to sell what should have been given freely, to someone you trusted." Her chest tightened. "I came here tonight to keep my mother from dying, to pay for the treatment that will let her see another birthday. You think I don't hate myself for this?" Damian stood abruptly and crossed to the window, his back to her. For a long moment, he said nothing, his reflection a dark silhouette against the glittering skyline. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, controlled, but laced with something she couldn't quite name. "You're not what I expected." "I can leave," she said quickly, standing on trembling legs. "If this is a problem, if you—" "No." The single word cracked like a whip. He turned, his gaze locking onto hers. "You stay." Her breath caught, but before fear could root in her chest, he moved closer. Not looming, not threatening, just near enough that she could smell his cologne, clean and dark and expensive. "You will not be touched tonight," he said, and for a moment she wondered if she'd heard him correctly. "What?" "I don't buy innocence, Miss Chen, and I don't take what isn't freely given. Tonight you'll stay as my guest. You'll eat, you'll rest, and you'll leave when you choose to. The $1 million was for the right to know who you are, not to break you." The words struck something deep inside her. Her knees gave out, and she sank back onto the sofa, tears burning hot against her lashes. She had prepared herself for so many possibilities: humiliation, pain, the coldness of being treated like a transaction, but not for this. "Why?" she whispered. Damian's expression softened, almost imperceptibly. "Because I have no use for fear, and because I'd rather see who you are when you're not terrified." He sat across from her again, and this time, when he looked at her, it wasn't as a man looking at a purchase. It was as a man looking at someone who had just shifted the ground beneath his feet. And in that moment, the tension between them became something different, something alive. Morning sunlight spilled through the floor-to-ceiling windows, golden and soft, turning the penthouse into a painting. Lila W's. Okay with a start, momentarily disoriented by the expanse of the guest room, the silk sheets, the quiet hum of the city far below, the absence of her cluttered apartment's creaks and coughs. For a terrifying instant she thought she'd dreamed the night before, that the auction, the $1 million bid, the man who had refused to touch her, had been some fevered invention. But then she caught the faint scent of coffee and something warm and savory, and reality returned with a rush. She sat up, heart hammering, every nerve alert. When she opened the door, she found him standing by the wide marble kitchen island, sleeves rolled back, pouring coffee with the same unhurried precision he'd used last night. He looked maddeningly composed, but there was something different in the air. A strange, charged quiet, as though the room itself was holding its breath. "You're awake," Damian said, not looking at her right away. His voice was the same low baritone that had haunted her dreams through the night, but softer now. "Sit. Eat." On the counter was a breakfast so perfect it almost looked staged. Croissants still warm from the oven, eggs folded like clouds, fruit arranged in careful symmetry. The contrast to the stale toast and instant coffee she usually lived on nearly undid her. "I didn't expect. Hospital cafeteria food is miserable," he said, cutting her off gently. "You'll need strength if you plan to spend the day with your mother. Eat." Something inside her loosened at the mention of her mother. You arranged the payment?" He finally looked at her then, and there was no mistaking the power in his gaze. "It was handled before sunrise. She will have her treatment today. You'll be there when she wakes." Relief crashed over her so hard it made her dizzy. She pressed a hand to the counter to steady herself. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't," he said simply, sipping his own coffee. "You sit, you eat, and then you listen. Because what I'm about to say is going to sound like madness, and you'll need a clear head to process it." Something in his tone made her obey without argument. She sat on one of the stools, hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles whitened. Damian set his cup down and studied her in silence for a long moment, as though weighing not just his words, but the entire trajectory of his life. "Last night, I bought one night," he said at last. "But one night isn't what I want. What I want is time. Real time." She blinked, uncertain she'd heard him correctly. "Time?" "6 months," he said, voice like steel wrapped in velvet. "You live here. You attend functions with me. You travel when I need you to. In return, your mother's treatments are fully covered until she's well, however long that takes. And when the 6 months end, you walk away with enough money to build whatever future you want. No debts, no fear." Lila's pulse pounded in her ears. 6 months? Living here? Yes. His gaze never left her face, as if he were measuring every micro-expression. "You'll have your own suite, your own freedom. I will never ask of you anything you do not wish to give. This would not be about my pleasure. This would be about companionship. Someone at my side I can trust not to have an agenda." Her chest tightened. "Why me?" "Because last night you stood on that stage shaking but unbroken. Because when I offered you the chance to leave, you stayed. And because you looked me in the eye when you told me why you were there. Do you have any idea how rare that is?" Lila looked away, her thoughts a hurricane. 6 months. It sounded both impossibly long and terrifyingly short. She pictured her mother laughing again, walking without pain, the weight of medical debt gone from their lives. She pictured herself standing in this gleaming apartment every day, her life orbiting around a man she barely knew, a man who seemed to see too much. "I don't know if I can," she whispered. Damian's expression didn't soften, but something behind his eyes did. "Then don't answer yet. Think. Go to the hospital. Be with your mother. Tonight, I'll send my driver to bring you back. If you say no, the offer is gone. If you say yes..." He let the words trail off, but the weight of them filled the room. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Lila stood, her legs unsteady. "I need to see my mom." "Of course." As she walked toward the private elevator, she felt Damian's gaze follow her. It wasn't ownership, wasn't possession. It was something stranger, more dangerous, like a man watching the first move in a game that could change everything. The doors closed, leaving her alone with her racing thoughts and the taste of coffee on her tongue. By the time she reached the hospital, she knew that her world had already tilted. The question now was whether she was brave enough to step into whatever future he was offering, or whether she would run back to the safety of her old life, with its debt, its desperation, and its walls. And deep down, she feared she already knew the answer. 3 days later, Lila stepped off the elevator into Damian Cole's penthouse for the second time. But this time, she wasn't a trembling stranger clutching a borrowed clutch. She was here because she had chosen to be. The agreement was signed, the conditions laid out. She had her own keycard now, her own suite, her own closet filled with clothes she never could have afforded, each garment chosen with unsettling precision for her size and style. The first weeks were strange, like living inside someone else's life. Days began with coffee on the balcony overlooking the city, followed by phone calls with her mother, who was already responding to treatment. Damian was usually gone by sunrise, disappearing into the world of boardrooms and negotiations. But every evening he returned, sometimes late, always immaculate, with an air of contained exhaustion. At first, their conversations were polite, measured, small talk over perfectly plated dinners prepared by the in-house chef. But as the nights passed, something began to shift. One evening she found him sitting on the terrace in shirt sleeves, tie discarded, a glass of wine in his hand, staring out over the skyline as though searching for something. "Bad day?" she asked cautiously. His mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Bad month." She hesitated, then joined him at the railing. The night air was cool, carrying the smell of rain from somewhere far below. For a moment, they stood in silence. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked finally. He glanced at her, one brow lifting. "Buying you?" Her face heated. "No, I mean, everything. The money, the empire, the power, all of it. Was it worth what you lost along the way?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he took a slow sip of wine, his gaze fixed on the glittering city. "When I was 29, I was engaged," he said at last. "Thought I'd built the perfect life, the perfect company, the perfect future. Then I found out she was in love with my business partner. They'd been planning to take half my company, half my clients, half my life. They nearly succeeded. That was the day I learned to stop trusting anyone who hadn't already proven they had nothing to gain from me." Lila was quiet for a long moment. "And you think I have nothing to gain?" "You already have it," he said, turning to face her. "Your mother's treatment, financial freedom. You could walk away tomorrow and never see me again. That's why I believe you when you say you're here because you chose to be." Something warm uncoiled in her chest at his words. For the first time since signing the contract, she felt like she wasn't a transaction. She was something else. That warmth carried her through the weeks that followed, charity dinners, quiet evenings, even the occasional burst of laughter between them that felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. She started to notice little things about him, the way he loosened his cufflinks when he was deep in thought, the faint crease between his brows when something amused him, but he refused to show it. But the real turning point came at the annual Children's Hospital Gala. It was the event of the season, a swirl of glittering gowns, black tuxedos, and champagne flutes clinking under the chandeliers. Damian was in his element, his hand resting lightly at the small of Lila's back as they made their entrance. Cameras flashed, heads turned, whispers rippled through the crowd. "You hate this," she murmured to him as they moved through the throng. "I tolerate it," he said under his breath. "It keeps the research funded. That's what matters." They were halfway through the evening when she saw the blonde, beautiful, poised, and walking toward them with a smile as sharp as broken glass. "Isabella," Damian said flatly. "Dummy." And she purred, her voice rich with mock sympathy. "You look well. Success suits you." "And betrayal suits you," he replied, just as cool. Isabella's gaze shifted to Lila, lingering just long enough to make her feel like she was being measured and dismissed in the same glance. "And this must be the latest addition to your collection." The words landed like a slap. Lila's cheeks flamed. Before she could speak, Damian's arm tightened around her waist, anchoring her in place. "She's not a collection," he said, his voice like ice. "She's the only person in this room who isn't playing a role. Now, if you'll excuse us." He didn't wait for Isabella's reply. He guided Lila straight to the dance floor, pulling her into his arms as the music swelled. "You didn't have to defend me," she whispered, her throat tight. "Yes," he said simply, spinning her into the music with quiet authority. "I did." The way he looked at her then, as if the rest of the glittering crowd had vanished, made her breath catch. The air between them felt electric, charged with something that had been building since the night she first stepped into his suite. "Damian," she said softly, not sure what she was asking. His hand tightened against her back. "This is more than an arrangement, Lila. At least it is for me." The world narrowed to the space between them, the soft brush of her gown against his trousers, the steady rhythm of his heart under her palm. She opened her mouth to reply, to say that it had become more for her too, but then the music ended and the applause broke the spell. Still, as they left the dance floor, she knew something had shifted permanently. Whatever this was, whatever careful line they'd drawn between business and something more, they had just crossed it. The rain was falling hard against the penthouse windows, tracing silver rivers down the glass as Lila stood in the center of the living room, her suitcase packed by the door. 6 months. That was what they had agreed on. And tonight, those 6 months were up. He had expected to feel relief, freedom. Instead, her chest felt hollow, as if something had been quietly scooped out of her while she wasn't looking. Damian was late. Of course he was. He was always late these days. His calendar packed with mergers, investors, board meetings. She had told herself that tonight would be just another evening. He'd come home, they'd share one last dinner, she would thank him for saving her mother's life, and then she would walk out. But the thought of leaving him behind, of leaving this place where she had slowly built a version of herself she never knew she could be, was tearing her apart. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. Damian stepped inside, shaking rain from his hair, his jaw set in a way she hadn't seen since the night of the gala. "You're leaving," he said, his gaze flicking to the suitcase by the door. "That was the deal," Lila said, her voice steady even as her heart pounded. For a long moment, he just stared at her. Then he crossed the room in 3 long strides and set a thick envelope on the table between them. "Your final payment," he said, "plus the trust I promised for your future. Everything is settled." It should have felt like victory, but instead it felt like a blade sliding between her ribs. She nodded, her throat tight. "Thank you for everything." "You're welcome." His voice was unreadable, clipped, too calm. The silence between them stretched until it became unbearable. Lila grabbed the handle of her suitcase. "I should go." "You can't," he said suddenly. She froze. "Excuse me?" "You can't go." His voice was different now, lower, rougher, as if some careful mask had just shattered. "Because if you walk out that door tonight, you're not coming back, and I can't let that happen." Her heart lurched. "Damian." "No," he said, stepping closer. His suit was still damp from the rain, his hair plastered to his forehead, but his eyes burned with something raw, something unguarded. "I thought I could do this, keep it controlled, keep it contained, but I can't. I don't want 6 months, I don't want a contract, I want you." She swallowed hard, tears stinging her eyes. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying this was never just about companionship for me. It hasn't been for a long time. I want you in my life, in my bed, in my world, in my future. I want to wake up and know you're still here, not because I paid you to be, but because you chose me." Her breath caught. "Damian, He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small black box, setting it gently on the table next to the envelope. When he opened it, the ring inside caught the light like captured starlight. "This is the real deal, Lila," he said, his voice rough. "No terms, no expiration date. I don't want to buy your time anymore. I want to spend the rest of mine with you. Marry me." The world seemed to tilt under her feet. She thought of her mother, healthy and laughing again. She thought of the girl she had been the night of the auction, terrified, desperate, standing on a stage like an object for sale. That girl would never have believed this moment was possible. She crossed the space between them, her hands trembling as she reached for his face. "You idiot," she whispered, her tears spilling freely now. "You think I'd ever walk away from you?" When he kissed her, it wasn't careful, wasn't controlled. It was everything they had been holding back for 6 months. The nigga, HTS of lingering glances, the moments of almost touch, the words they hadn't dared speak. It was rain and fire and every promise they had yet to keep. When they finally broke apart, breathless, Damian slid the ring onto her finger. "You're mine now," he said softly. Lila smiled through her tears. "No," she whispered, her voice shaking with something that felt like joy. "We're each other's." Outside, the storm broke, the rain easing into a soft drizzle that shimmered under the city lights. Inside, for the first time in a very long time, Lila felt at home. Not in the penthouse, not in the wealth, but in the arms of the man who had bought one night with her and ended up giving her forever.